Pastor Doug here from Crossroads. It's great to be with you. I hope that today's message will draw you closer to Jesus.
How many of you have ever had to do physical therapy or some sort of physical rehab at some point or another? Yeah, a lot of you. Maybe it was for an injury, maybe you had like an ongoing pain thing they were trying to correct, or maybe you were just recovering from surgery and they had you go to physical therapy. Well, if you've ever done this, you know that there's kind of two parts of physical therapy. There's the part where you go into the office and the physical therapist kind of shows you what to do, helps run you through the exercises. And then there's the sheet they give you to take home. Isn't it? That's the second part of therapy, the sheet they give you to take home. And that's full of all of the exercises you're supposed to be doing at home. Now, I know some of you laugh because you don't have to raise your hands for this one, but how many of you would say, yeah, we struggle with the part that they send us home with? Yeah, that's a major issue sometimes, and I know physical therapists will agree with that. Now, many of you know that in September 2023, I tore my ACL. And as I was meeting with the surgeons and talking with the surgeons about the upcoming surgery, he gave me my different surgical options, and there was a new procedure that I was going to potentially try. And he said, do your research on this and decide which one you want to do. So as I was thinking about doing this new procedure, I did all the research. And one of the things that really showed up in this particular procedure, even more so than the other ones, was it said, you have to do all the rehab. You have to do all the exercises, not just the ones in the office, but outside. If you want this to work, if you want this to recover, you actually have to go home and do what the therapists tell you to do. If you can't do that or you won't do that, just don't bother getting this procedure. It was very, very clear. So I thought about this right up from the front. If I wanted to return to running, soccer, basketball, I was going to have to fully commit to the rehab, not just in the physical therapist's office, but on my own. If I wanted to recover, I was going to have to do what they told me to do. It wasn't going to be enough just to spend time with my physical therapist showing me what to do. It wasn't going to be enough to memorize the list of exercises. I was actually going to have to do them multiple times a day in various locations. I was going to have to do it. If I wanted to get back to the things that I loved, I had to do the work. Now, what's true of my physical therapy is also true of following Jesus. Now, we've been in this series called Practicing the Way. And we're looking at the idea of what does it look like to actually be a follower of Jesus. And one of the best terms to describe what it looks like to actually be a follower of Jesus is this term apprentice. And there are kind of three things that an apprentice does. They be with their master, they become like their master, and they do what their master does. Now, being an apprentice of Jesus means doing each one of these three things as well. And Pastor Doug has done an awesome job the last couple of weeks of detailing what it looks like to be with Jesus and what it looks like to start to become like Jesus. So today what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the third part of this apprenticeship process, the doing what Jesus did. So our goal for this morning is I'm hoping that this message will encourage you and will motivate you to make doing what Jesus did a necessary and increasing part of your faith journey. So for us to begin this morning, we're going to go back to the very beginning of Jesus' earthly ministry, to the calling of his first apprentices. So we're going to look at Matthew chapter 4 here, and we're going to start in verse 18. And it says this: As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once, they left their nets and followed him. So what's interesting about this calling of Jesus' apprentice is he kind of lays out for them exactly what he wants for them and what he expects for them. Saying, come, follow me, and what? What was the ultimate purpose of what he was going to do with them if they came and followed him? It was to send them out to fish for people. Now, this term fish for people wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It wasn't just to butter up to the fishermen. This was an actual term that was an honorific given to great rabbis. It was meant to mean somebody who can capture the hearts and the minds of people. So Jesus is laying out right in front of them the calling and the expectation right from the very start. He said, come follow me, and you'll get the opportunity to be with me. You'll get the opportunity to become like me, and ultimately, you're going to get the chance to do what I do, to reach the hearts and minds of other people. Disciples, followers, apprentices of Jesus are called and are expected to do as Jesus did. In the book, John Mark Comer has this quote about this. He says, your end goal is to grow and mature into the kind of person who can say and do all of the things that Jesus said and did. Now, this shouldn't really surprise us all that much. I mean, after all, isn't that the goal of all apprenticeships? I mean, think about it. Electricians, doctors, mechanics, coaches, lawyers. Each and every one of them spends time and learns from others around them who do the same job, with the inevitable goal of them eventually taking over and doing those same things. Let's take a lawyer, for instance. It takes a tremendous amount of time and energy to become a lawyer. It takes like 7+ years to be able to do this. It takes thousands of hours of study, many high-pressure exams, numerous reviews and licenses, and all that stuff that need to be attained. Now, can you imagine at the end of this long and grueling process, someone gets through all of this and said, oh, yeah, I never really intended to be a lawyer. I was just hoping that I'd understand Suits and Law and Order when I watch them a little bit more often. That sounds absurd. Like, nobody does that. But just as it would be absurd to go through years and years of law school and then never intend to ever practice law, it's equally strange to claim to follow Jesus and then never to do the things that Jesus did. So, it should seem obvious to those of us who follow Jesus, who are apprenticing with Jesus, that we should end up doing what Jesus did. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. See, there's a danger for many of us. And the danger for us is not that we don't believe in Jesus. The danger for us is that we stop at belief and we don't translate that belief into action. And I don't think it happens to us intentionally, but it happens. And I think part of this is the first two steps of the apprenticeship process, the be with Jesus and become like Jesus, are very inward. They focus us internally on our relationship with Jesus. And so what can happen is that we get caught up in that first two phases, the inward phase of our relationship with Jesus. However, that third phase, doing what Jesus did, is very external. And it requires a different thing. And so we can get lost in that inward part of faith, and we can sometimes neglect the outward part of faith. And I think one of the ways this manifests is when we get caught up in thinking that following Jesus is about believing the right things. But this can lead to a very odd version of faith. Here's an analogy. It'd be kind of like a group of people who decide they're going to go on tour with a band. They've got tickets to all the concerts in the band. They follow the band around wherever it is they go. They have all the songs memorized. They have all the merchandise. They actually start dressing like the band. They spend hours and hours talking over the set list from the previous show, what they might be playing in the next show. They'll even sometimes be analyzing what the singer had for breakfast that morning. In every way, they are as close to the band as you can possibly get. In some ways, they seem indistinguishable from the band. But unless you're actually on stage playing an instrument or singing a song, they aren't really part of the band. Now, James, in his letter, warns us strenuously about the type of faith that stops at belief and never contains action. And James 2:14 says this, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such a faith save them?" If we want to truly follow Jesus, it is essential for us that we don't stop at belief. It's essential for us that we actually do what Jesus did. Let's face it, every single one of us has areas in our lives, multiple areas of our lives, where this is a struggle for us, where we don't do as well of translating what we actually believe into action. Because it's hard. I mean, let's face it, it is much easier to read about Jesus forgiving his enemies than it is for us to forgive ours. It is much easier to believe in Jesus doing miracles than to believe that we can. It is much, much easier to marvel at Jesus eating with disreputable people than for us to host that dinner. That's why following Jesus is so hard. Back to the Comer quote, "Your end goal is to grow and mature into the kind of person who can say and do the things that Jesus said and did." So if the goal of apprenticeship to Jesus is to do what he did, we have to ask the question, what did Jesus actually do? What are the things that Jesus actually did? So when we look at Jesus' ministry, we can categorize his work into kind of three key rhythms. And we're going to spend the rest of the time on the three key rhythms of what Jesus did. If we want to actually do what Jesus did, we have to do these three things, these three rhythms. One, we have to make space for the gospel, we have to preach the gospel, and we have to demonstrate the gospel. So let's jump right into the first one, making space for the gospel. What does it mean to make space for the gospel? Well, this one is all about the idea of hospitality. This one's all about hospitality. Matthew 11:19 starts out like this. It says, "The Son of Man came eating and drinking." Now, this is cool because one of the methods Jesus used to spread the gospel was food. Jesus was a food guy, and that's great. I love that. Jesus loved sharing meals with people, and he met all kinds of people. He shared food with tax collectors, religious leaders, fishermen, scholars, people who were friendly with him, people who were opposed to him. He ate with everybody. And this is one of those things that we really should be able to get into. I mean, all of us like food. All of us like eating. And Jesus ate with all kinds of people because eating with people breaks down walls and breaks down barriers. And I think this particular rhythm is incredibly important to us right now because one of the biggest problems facing the church going forward is that Christianity is in a lot of ways seen as a problem in today's society. It used to be that Christianity was considered a societal good. And then over time that eroded and eroded to the point where kind of Christianity was just kind of irrelevant. But now more and more that irrelevance is being translated into hostility. And we have to figure out ways to break down those barriers. So how do we break down those barriers between people who might be hostile to what they think we have to say? Well, we can do it exactly like Jesus did. We can share meals with people. We can connect over food and beverages. Something happens when we eat with people, when we spend time with them in this way. It connects us. It helps us see other people, and it helps them see us. Hospitality puts an individual face on Jesus and on Christians. And it can help start creating some dissonance between what they've heard about us, what they've seen about us in other places, and the person sitting right across the table from them. It can create a crazy space for discussion. And you don't know where a discussion is going to go over a meal. When we eat and drink with others, we get to know them. We get to know their lives. They get to know us. And it can create an incredible and invaluable space for us to have conversations about God, which we're going to talk about in another minute. But at the very basic, it just conveys a sense of value. When we eat with somebody, it means that we value them, that we care about them, that their time is worth something to us. And that's really important. So what are the opportunities around you for hospitality? Could you invite somebody out to lunch or coffee? Is there a neighbor that you could have over for dinner? What other social connections do you have that you might be able to find opportunities to connect with over food or beverage? It's kind of interesting. A new kind of line of opportunity has opened up to Jess and I through our daughter Olivia. She's now 3 years old and is now old enough to start having play dates with some of her friends from daycare. And so just last weekend we had her friend and her mom over to our house for a play date. And now there's just a whole another group of people that we have the opportunity to have hospitality with through our daughter. What social connections, what other things do you have that you might be able to use to help be able to spread the gospel through food and hospitality? So the next one, the second rhythm of what Jesus did that can help us do what he did was preach the gospel. Now, let's be honest. For many of us, this one is going to be the one that challenges us most. We're willing to bite the bullet and have a great meal at a great restaurant with somebody for Jesus. We're much more willing to do that. But when it comes to preaching the gospel, that one is a little trickier, isn't it? Here's an eye-opening quote about preaching the gospel today from the book. In our generation, the primary problem with evangelicalism isn't that we're doing it. This is in reference to preaching the gospel, by the way. The primary problem with evangelicalism isn't that we're not doing it, preaching the gospel, with bullhorns and low-grade bigotry. It's that we are not doing it at all. It's that we're not preaching the gospel at all. And there's lots of reasons why this is the case. We've all, as referenced in here, we've all seen the bad examples. We've all seen the street preacher that makes us cringe. We've all seen those terrible tracts that look like $100 bills that people pick up. They've all seen the kind of turn and burn signs that everyone's trying to do. We've all had examples and encountered examples of people doing this very badly. And that turns us off from wanting to do it. Also, there's just a realm of fear. It's putting yourself out there a little bit. And some of us are afraid to do that. What happens if it harms the relationship if we talk about Jesus? What happens if I don't know what to say? They say something in response and I have no idea what to say. And so we clam up and we're a little bit afraid of that. We also have our culture to deal with. I mean, let's face it, we live in a postmodern culture, a culture where truth claims are met with skepticism and derision. And we just get this impression I just don't want to impose what I think on somebody else. In fact, our culture has taken such root in our mindsets that this kind of shocking stat has emerged. And this is a survey done of millennial Christians. 47% of them, nearly half, said that it was wrong to share one's personal belief with someone of a different faith in hope that they would one day share the same faith. That's a crazy stat. Now, this same group of people, nearly all of them also said that having a personal relationship with Jesus was the best thing that could happen to somebody. There's a dissonance there. Now, this might sound like a pretty discouraging stat, but there is good news. And the good news is that sharing the gospel, talking about Jesus isn't about arguing with people. It's just telling people about Jesus. It's just sharing about Jesus. Now, the book suggests kind of 5 best practices for how we can do a good job of preaching the gospel. I just want to focus on 2 of them this morning. And the first one is this. Let's find where God is already working and join him. Find where God is already working and join him. One of the things that I think trips us up sometimes is that we assume that if someone is not a current follower of Jesus, that means they're not interested in God and that God is not at work in their lives. And so that implicit assumption makes it more intimidating for us to think about talking with somebody about this stuff, because we think it means we have to generate an interest in God first. We've got all these hurdles to come over. But what would happen if we flipped that assumption around? What would happen if we started out believing that the God of the universe is at work in every single person we encounter in some way, shape, or form? What would happen if we flipped that assumption? If we did that, we'd find out that at this point, we're not generating something out of thin air. We're just jumping on board with what Jesus is already doing in the life of somebody around us. And this subtle shift in mindset can be a game changer in how we view preaching the gospel. I had a story of this not too long ago. Some point last year, I felt like God was telling me to invite this one person to church. And so I got online and I messaged him. I was like, hey, I would love to invite you out to church. And he responded, and he said this. He said, yeah, I'd love to come. We've been looking and thinking about getting into a church. I had no idea. I had no concept that this person was even considering church at all. But all it took was for me to join in with what God was already doing in that person's life. And you'd be amazed at how often that's the case when we take that step and share Jesus. The second thing that's going to help us preach the gospel more effectively is this idea of bearing witness. Well, what does it mean to bear witness? Well, let's look at kind of like an analogy of a courtroom drama. We've all seen a courtroom drama at some point in our lives. They bring a witness up to the witness stand and they sit them in the witness box. And what is the role of a witness in that instance? The role of a witness is simply to tell others what they have seen and heard. The same is true with us. The New Testament calls us witnesses. Followers of Jesus are to be witnesses to what we've seen and heard Jesus doing in our individual lives, in our family, in our church, in our community. If we think about it, I think each and every one of us has something that Jesus has done in our individual life, something we've seen in the church, something we've seen in general, that we could talk to somebody about, a story that we could share, something that we could say to somebody else over a cup of coffee. Each one of us is capable of talking about what Jesus has done in our lives. Now, this brings us back to Peter. If we remember, Peter was called to be an apprentice of Jesus. And we see the story of Peter in Acts chapter 2, coming back later. The background on this is after Jesus' resurrection. Jesus has gone back into heaven. God has sent the Holy Spirit during the season of Pentecost. Huge crowds are in Jerusalem from all over the place, and God is starting to move in major and dramatic ways. And people did not understand what was going on or what was happening or how they make sense of it. And into this moment steps Peter. Now, Peter had been called 3 years earlier. And Jesus told him he was going to fish for people. He was going to be able to reach the hearts and minds of people if he followed Jesus. He had done a 3-year apprenticeship with Jesus. And now it was time for him to step up and do what Jesus did. And we see this in Acts chapter 2, verses 14. And Peter stood up with the 11, raised his voice and addressed the crowd, fellow Jews, and all of you who live in Jerusalem, let me explain this to you. Listen carefully to what I say. Peter, in this moment, was finally ready to step up and do what Jesus did, to put his faith into practice. And Peter goes on. He gives a lengthy speech to the crowd that was assembled there. It's really interesting to read. You should check it out sometime. But we come back down to the end of this. After his speech, Acts 2:41. Those who accepted his message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. Peter was with Jesus. Peter became like Jesus. And then finally, Peter stepped in and was able to do what Jesus did. Now, your calling to preach the gospel will likely not be as dramatic as that of Peter's. It might just be with a friend over coffee. But that's still doing what Jesus did. That's still preaching the gospel, one person at a time, one relationship at a time, one friend at a time. And I know sometimes we wonder, well, what if they don't respond or what if they don't listen? Here's the deal. Like any witness in a trial, the outcome isn't up to the witness. In a trial, it's up to the attorneys and the judge and the jury. The witness is just there to tell their story. That's what their responsibility is. When it comes to preaching the gospel, it's the same with us. The outcome is up to God. It's between God and that other person. We are just called to tell our story. Are we willing to share what Jesus has done in our life with someone around you? I think we can do it. Let's go to the third rhythm. The third rhythm is demonstrate the gospel. Jesus did not just preach the gospel, he demonstrated it, he embodied it with his life. And we can do the same thing. We are called to live in such a way that it brings the kingdom of God into the world. And there's kind of two arenas where this works out well for us, where we can do this. And the primary one is work. The arena of work. This is all of the daily responsibilities, your job, you're raising your kids, you're taking care of your household and managing those type of things. This is the area in which we spend most of our lives. And one of the key ways that we can demonstrate the gospel in this area of our lives is to view that as a calling, as a ministry. If you work in an office, God has a ministry for you in that office. If you go to the gym on a regular basis, God has placed you at that gym for a specific purpose. If you're even in like a mom's group in the local neighborhood, you have been called by God to demonstrate him in that space. We need to see the places and the people around us as places we have been called to. And the good news is that we can do that where we're already going. We don't have to go anywhere extra. We don't have to do anything different. We just have to see the places we already go and do the things we already do and keep it in mind that we are there as representatives of God. And one of the cool ways that we can do this is through that second one, the good works. These are sporadic acts of love. In those spaces where we're called, we can do sporadic acts of love for people. Our welcome team, we call these wow moments, where we try to find opportunities to do something a little extra for somebody, where we can step into a specific space and do something special and loving for somebody. Maybe it's just something that will help demonstrate their value or their worth. Maybe it's something where we can provide assistance or care. Or maybe it's just loving people in a difficult moment. But there are all sorts of unique and interesting ways in which we can do this. The Welcome team recently read a book called Unreasonable Hospitality. And there's some awesome stories of this restaurant in New York City doing stuff like this. And one of my favorite stories, the restaurant was called 11 Madison Park. It was a 4-star restaurant. At one point it was voted the #1 restaurant in the world. And this is like a very nice, very fancy restaurant. And the waiters there are specifically trained to do these type of things. And one of the first times they did it was there was a group of people from a foreign country, I forget which country, but they were talking about their experiences in New York City. This was the last meal before they had to immediately head to the airport. And they were talking about all the things they loved and enjoyed. And they said, but there's just kind of one regret we had. And the waiter overheard them talking about this. And he said, we never got one of the hot dogs from one of those hot dog carts. So the waiter reported that to his manager. The manager of this 4-star restaurant proceeds to go out into the street, find a local hot dog vendor, buy one of these hot dogs for like $2, come in, bring it into this 4-star chef, and have this 4-star chef plate this hot dog up. And then they presented it to them at the table. It's like, we don't want you to leave New York with having any regrets. And he said the reaction was, you would have thought they won the lottery. They were so excited. And it's just those little moments, those little opportunities where we have the chance to do something for somebody else, to step into those moments, to show people how much they're worth, how much their value is, to show love and care. I had one that I was able to do recently, and I wish I could say it started from a great motive, but it didn't. We've had all this snow recently, and when I would go out, I would go to shovel our front porch and our sidewalk, I would notice that the house, 2 houses down from us on the end, never shoveled their walk, ever. They never shoveled their walk, and it bothered me every time. I think it was like the situation, I think it's like an apartment building, and then like the landlord's supposed to do it, but the landlord doesn't do it, and the tenants don't do it, so it just doesn't get done. And the problem is, like, at the end of our block is an elementary school. So this is like the prime walking space for like little school kids, and they don't shovel their walk. And so after a couple times of getting really annoyed about this, it dawned on me, God was like, I'm getting you annoyed about this so you do something about it. So then I realized, all right, I will go shovel their walk. And then I also realized it would look bad if I did mine, skip my immediate neighbors, and then did the one on the side. So for the last several times of doing it, I've shoveled the walks of the 3 houses on the left side of mine. But those are opportunities. God will put things on your heart and put things on your mind, put people on your mind. And you have the opportunity to do something for them in a way where we can demonstrate the gospel in people's lives. So in conclusion today, following Jesus isn't just something that's done in our hearts and minds. Jesus meant it to come out in the way we live and what we do each and every day. So let's heed the calling of Jesus by doing what he did. Now, you may have been moved by one of these particular rhythms today. And on your connection card, there's the opportunity. I want you, each one of you, I want to challenge you this week, take one tangible step towards actually doing what Jesus did in one of these 3 areas this week. Maybe it's inviting somebody a meal. Maybe it's sharing part of your story. Or maybe it's just serving somebody in a way that you haven't done before. Take one tangible step in one of these areas. If you're willing to do that, mark that on your connection card. Jesus' invitation wasn't for us to just learn about him. It's for us to do what he did. So let's take that step this week.
Thanks again for listening. Any step you take towards Jesus is a step in the right direction. You can find out more about us at crbic.org. That's crbic.org.